All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher, and we are in the presence of greatness today. And I'm not talking about Drew Dinsick, who has horses running around behind him in his background. I'm talking about the great Connor Rogers, my co-host on Fantasy Football Happy Hour, who I see 6 days a week during football season, for better or worse. Connor, you'll see I've hung up the Aaron Judge jersey behind me today, specifically because I know you're a diehard New York Mets fan. And keen to get your thoughts on everything draft related. So let's get straight into it. Connor, in terms of teams in the top 10 of the draft, is there one that you're paying most attention to right now?
I think I always look for entry points, right? I mean, we know 1 and 2, and I know people will tell you different about 2 for a while. That was a lot of bluffing. The Commanders, they know they have to take a quarterback. They have a new owner, a new GM, a new staff. I mean, do we think they're going to be picking in the top 2 next year when the quarterback class is thinner than this one, in my opinion? No. So 1 and 2 are not entry points. Caleb Williams, and then one of the next tier of quarterbacks will go probably between Drake May and Jaden Daniels. So then you look at New England was the next team. Would people trade into them? I think New England will have a lot of pressure from ownership to get a quarterback to kind of reset the face of the franchise there as well. So I really don't expect a lot of movement in the top 3 anymore. So I think the team I'm paying the most attention to is Arizona because, number one, Monty Ossenfort last year showed he will move up and down the board. It was pretty impressive the way he was able to handle that. 2, I find that draft media like myself looks at Marvin Harrison Jr. and goes, well, you just have to take him. He's the best player in the draft. I don't think the NFL shares that opinion. Marvin Harrison Jr. is, highly respected, viewed in a very big way. But I don't think he's looked at as a prospect where you have to cement yourself, according to the NFL. So I think Arizona would take calls. Now, will a team be aggressive? I've heard the prices are insane to come up right now, and that it has teams with a little bit of cold feet at the moment. We're talking 3 first-round picks, and a lot of the teams that want to move up are just outside the top 10 in 11 to 13. Are you trading 3 first-round picks to move up 8 spots, 7 spots, maybe if it's for a quarterback, but you have to really love that guy. And it's not that a GM or a scout loves that guy. It's that the coaching staff wants to develop him. The scouts have huge grades on him. The owner is saying, yes, go do this. This is going to be how we restart our franchise. So I look at Arizona because I think they'd answer the phone. The Chargers are the same way. The Falcons are the same way. Those are the 3 teams that they'd love more picks. They're going to charge an insane price. So we'll see if teams actually do it. And then I'd say the Titans are a sleeper to move out, but 7's a weird spot where you go, why would somebody move into 7 and pay that price? So I know I gave you a lot of teams, but I would really stick with Arizona and the Chargers because those are pivot points.
Makes total sense to me. There was kind of some interesting stuff floating around about the Giants this week that I want to ask you about since you are a New York-centric guy. 2 drafts ago was the first draft of this regime. They had a lot of keys in that draft because they had 2 top 10 picks. And my takeaways from that draft cycle were, wow, these guys are amazing liars. They're lying liars who lie, and they did an incredible job of obfuscating ultimately who they had eyes for in that draft. And I kind of look at what has come out this week about the Giants where, they have the green light from ownership to take a quarterback. And I'm like, that sounds like either they want to trade down and they're trying to get somebody to trade up, or they're hoping that someone will, they're going to induce a trade up and that one of the 2 elite wide receivers falls in their lap. Am I on the right track here? And do you think that in general, there is a situation where they don't come away with kind of an elite wide receiver prospect in this draft?
Drew, I would side with you. Being here in New York, the quarterback stuff started back in February, and it's gotten really loud the last couple of weeks where I go, okay, is this manufactured? Now, what I will say is this. The reason why I'm a little more torn on it now than I previously was, I never bought in that staff and the regime a little bit was as in on Daniel Jones as ownership was. Daniel Jones has always been loved by ownership. And if you know anything about the New York Giants, ownership is very involved in the football aspect of the team. It's not always, I don't think it's problematic like some franchises are, but it's not always, hey, you're the football guys, call us in, January or whatever. We'll figure out the cash for free agency. There's definitely vocal opinions, and I think that they didn't want to see Daniel Jones go. I don't think that the staff and regime pushed back and said, there's no way we could pay Daniel Jones, but I just don't think they were as excited about it. There's a reason why the 2 years were guaranteed, not beyond 2 years. There's a huge out in Daniel Jones' contract after this year. So when you think about it like that, the Giants have to ask themselves, one, where's our job security? I don't think things are hot for the front office and coaching staff. I also don't think things are great where there's just no way there's going to be any talk about them if they have another bad season. So you have to ask yourself, well, one of two things. One, are we going to be this bad again next year? They shouldn't, right? I think they're a well-coached team. I think they're missing talent right now. Now you have an opportunity to get more talent. So does that make you look at it and go, well, we should go get our quarterback now because we might never be able to do that while we're here. And then we're going to blink and we're fired and we never took our guy. That's a real fear inside organizations with regimes. So I think the Giants, long story short, there might be one quarterback. And I always look at Drake May's traits and go, that's the guy Brian Daboll would want to coach. Would the Giants have the opportunity to go get him? New England would have to pick up the phone at 3. And for New England, that's not a bad move because you're only going back to 6. You're still getting a great player if you're not as comfortable with the quarterbacks that are there at 3. And for the Giants, it's not that big of a leap where it's going to cost you 3 first-round picks. But all in all, I have felt for a long time that the Giants probably look at it and go, we're at 6. It's unlikely we can get our guy. If we can, maybe we'll answer the phone. But at 6, we really need a number 1 wide receiver. And Malik Neighbors will probably be there at 6, or there's a good chance he'll be there. He's the perfect fit for them. So for the Giants, I would lean playmaker. I think it's pretty tight, but I just think they're in a weird place right now where I don't know if everybody is exactly on the same page of where that state of the franchise is and who's high on Daniel Jones bouncing back next year and who's not.
Yeah. It's kind of an awfully constructed team at present, the New York Giants, where the strength of their team is basically interior defensive line and linebacker, which is not where rather those strengths be at quarterback, receiver, corner, and all of those places are kind of lacking. So it does seem that, I mean, when the JJ McCarthy going top 4 buzz was a little bit hotter, I mean, that was great for the Giants because then you would have either Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors fall to them. Now it might be more Rome Odunze territory, though Neighbors is still the favorite to go there at plus 145, and the Giants are minus 225 to take a wide receiver, with quarterback being the second option there. Connor, you are very plugged in to the New York Jets, your beloved Jets, and we'll talk about them in terms of their prospects to go far this year, which I know that you're cautious against, as is your nature as a Jets fan. But in terms of the draft, 10th overall pick, Brock Bowers is the favorite to go there at plus 150. What do you think the Jets ultimately do at 10?
They definitely really like him, and they definitely need a number 2 pass catcher in this offense. I think it's going to be a build-up for Mike Williams. I don't think Mike Williams is out there week 1 playing 90% of the snaps, and you're just feeding him 11 targets. And, you know, they love Garrett Wilson, but you need more. So I think Bowers, rightfully so, I think those odds are set right. I don't think this is smoke where it's like, oh, there's so much about Brock Bowers and the Jets that there's no way this could be true. If you actually follow the Jets draft trends up until last year, Will McDonald was a surprise. They've been pretty predictable overall. I mean, there was so much smoke around them and Mekhi Becton in the first round that year. Everybody knew they were taking Zach Wilson months before the draft. Everybody kind of knew they loved Elijah Vera Tucker. They traded up for him. Sauce Gardner was a bit of a surprise pick, but Garrett Wilson wasn't. And they were obsessed with Jermaine Johnson, and they went back into round 1 and got him. So a lot of the prospects the Jets have been connected to over the years, they've ended up with. So they definitely love Brock Bowers. I think what it's going to come down to when they have these debates, and those debates go on right now, is how do we view this offensive line class, and how do we construct our offensive line versus taking the weapon right now? And how do we look? Number one, the number 1 priority for the Jets will be to trade out, by the way. Like, that's where the conversation starts. They would love to get rid of this pick. They don't have a 2nd round pick because they traded it for Aaron Rodgers. The Jets, far and away, would love to trade out of this pick because then it becomes a little less convoluted. Say you move out of 10, right? And you go back in, we'll call it, whatever, somewhere from 19 to 27. I'm just spitballing here. Then you take an offensive lineman. Because this is a really good offensive line class. Then you got a 2nd rounder back. You take your receiver, and then your 3rd round pick, you could double dip at either one of those spots or go somewhere else. When you're stuck at 10 and don't pick till 72, it's, well, we better be cautious here because if we don't take the offensive lineman, what's our plan when Tyron Smith misses 5 games? What's our plan when one of our interior guys gets hurt? Do we sign David Bakhtiari over the summer and pray that he can make it past 3 games? Because he really hasn't been able to play much football the last couple of years. So ultimately, I have this phrase that I've been running into the ground. Taking Bowers, as great as he is, and he's my 5th overall player in the draft, it just feels like eating your dessert when you never had your vegetables. It's like, this is awesome. It's exciting. Oh, it's October. Our offensive line sucks because we had 2 injuries and Aaron Rodgers is hurt again. Like, how do you balance that? So looking at this board, I still lean. It feels like, your head versus heart kind of pick. It feels like at the end of the day, they'll take an offensive lineman like Taliese Fuaga. I could see Troy Fatanu. I think both those guys have tackle guard flexibility, but I know there's a big part of them that would probably love to take Bowers. So it's nice that both of these are plus money. By the way, I don't think Rome Odunze makes it to them. That's why I'm not factoring in wide receiver in this pick. So I'd call it trade out, offensive line, Bowers in that order.
I like it. And trade out, we would say they would almost certainly be looking for an offensive lineman. But I've come around on this because the first whiffs, I was like, man, are they floating Bowers to try to induce a trade up, or just to try to get out of this? Because some team in the teens may have like super high rating on him and want him, be like, oh, the Colts, he's the piece, for to pair with Anthony Richardson or something like that. But now I'm kind of at the place where, this is clearly a win now team. It feels like the pressure around this kind of front office is real, which is hilarious because in the same draft that the Giants had 2 first-round picks and whiffed on both, the Jets had 2 top 10 picks and hit 2 all pros. And yet here they are in a must-win year for this state of the franchise. But
the funny thing about that, Drew, not to cut you off, the Giants wanted Sauce Gardner so badly in that draft. They were devastated when he went right in front of them. So it's funny how one or 2 pick difference can make.
Yeah. But I guess I've just kind of come around. It's like you shrug your shoulders, like they're in win now mode, and Bowers is the guy. But in the situation where they do trade down, would you expect that is someone coming up to get him, or is this a potential where he could slide into the late teens, the mid to late teens?
The trade for me seems like a situation that the draft goes away. A lot of people didn't expect, and I wouldn't rule this out. Quarterback, right? So we'll call that group Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May to keep this kind of simple. Then you have McCarthy and Penix as the most likely next 2 to be taken in the first round. And nobody takes them from all the way to pick 10. They're both still sitting there, which is, I'll say this, the Titans and the Falcons will answer the phone. The Chargers will answer the phone. Arizona will answer the phone. But are those teams just saying we're charging too much? Because the Jets aren't going to overcharge. Like, they would really like to get out of this pick. Then you have that cluster of 11 to 13 where they all want a quarterback, right? Minnesota, Denver, and Vegas. They all want a quarterback. And then there's always the mystery team on the back end that we don't know. Is that the Rams at 19? I mean, Stafford's not going to play forever. Is it, let's call it, it sounds crazy, but Seattle at 16, right? And you got to remember, Washington's offensive coordinator this year was Coach Grubb, who, is now the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks. Maybe he still really believes in Michael Penix. So is one of those teams going to look and go, God, we can't say you're the Raiders or the Broncos. We can't let JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix fall to 11. That's our guy. The Vikings will just take him. We'll call the Jets and we'll offer an extra third, like nothing crazy, and we'll slide and we get our guy. We don't care. That's the situation for the Jets that has to happen, which seems unlikely, but not out of the realm of possibilities. It's really a 3-man standoff between Minnesota, Denver, and Vegas. Who is going to blink and pay the price? Because you sit there, if you're them, and you're like, damn, I don't want to give up all that draft capital for these guys. But then do you walk out of the draft and it's like, cool, Sam Darnold's our starter. Jarrett Stidham's our starter. Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew's our starter. The way Antonio Pierce talks in his press conference, it sounds like he doesn't even want that. He's like, you got to be aggressive in the draft. So I think ultimately one of those teams might blink.
Yep. I think that makes sense. It just doesn't feel like we're going to go into a world where Jarrett Stidham and Aiden O'Connell are both starting quarterbacks in week 1. Maybe one of them, and maybe they go in with Minshew and they think the defense is good enough, but it does seem a little bit improbable that the music is going to stop and they're all going to be holding Gardner Minshew chairs. Last question before we hit a break, Connor, just pivoting away from the draft and speaking about the Jets and their actual prospects on the field. Like I mentioned, you are always very cautious about any Jets optimism, given their past 40 years of what they've done on the field. But just looking at the PFF lineup page for the New York Jets, there's a lot of green. Like, this team is absolutely stacked in terms of the roster. The defense is perhaps the most talented in the league. They lost some pieces, but you had Hassan Reddick. The best corner tandem in the league, you would probably, with Reed and Sauce. And then the offensive line, you had Tyron Smith, obviously a health concern, but he's better than anyone they had last year. And you had Morgan Moses, and you have to project more health for Rodgers naturally than what he gave the team last year. So, like, this team right now has longer Super Bowl odds than the Falcons. Like, they're 14-1 to win the AFC. Where do you stand on the Jets, and what are your expectations for next year?
I think the key with the Jets is to evaluate, and not even really them, but what's around them right now. Buffalo got worse. Miami got worse. New England is not going anywhere right now. We don't even know if that staff's going to work out. I mean, a lot of people in New England are excited about that, but we have no idea what that staff is. So when you factor in that, by nature, with Rodgers coming back, it's still Aaron Rodgers. It benefits the Jets. Now, yeah, you have to be cautious because the Jets' number one concern is health, which also your depth is usually dictated by what you do in the draft. If the Jets were able to trade out of 10 and walk out of the first 2 days of the draft with a really good offensive line prospect, a really exciting wide receiver prospect, and then that third round pick, once again, is depth at another key need, you go, well, the Jets protected themselves well this year, something they didn't do last year, because Tyrod Taylor is the backup for Aaron Rodgers. We know he can win you games. You actually have backup guys for the offensive line, and you have multiple pass catchers that can get the job done. Now, of course, there's always the call, like, what is Rodgers going to be at this age coming off the Achilles? That's a variable. Can Robert Saleh coach this team to the playoffs? That's a variable as well. So I know I am very usually pessimistic or cautious with this team, but it feels like the playing field got a lot more even. And let's not forget, the Bills have lost at MetLife the last 2 years to Zach Wilson-led Jets teams. Like, that is Josh Allen's stats at MetLife against Robert Saleh's defense is extremely concerning right now. I think Mike McDaniel has done a good job coaching against the Jets. He's known Saleh his whole football life, so he knows how to scheme around that. But Miami, they have a lot of thin points of the roster as well. So I think after the draft, as you know, some of the public kind of piles on this, it might go to plus 175, plus 160. Plus 200, there's some value there for the Jets to win this division, because the division just doesn't scare you like it did for so many years.
Yeah, we agree. 2 through 53, this is clearly the best team in the AFC East. And I think they are clearly, kind of lumped in with the likes of the Bengals and the Ravens and the Texans as kind of tier 2 behind the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm surprised the market is still as warm as they are on the Buffalo Bills. I guess it hasn't really sunk in, the degree to which they've taken a step back from a roster or talent standpoint. Number one on the roster, though, and Aaron Rodgers. Can you just give me just a general vibe check? People are excited about the way things are going this offseason?
I think cautiously optimistic, right? I mean, Rodgers is a guy that's in the news for a lot of reasons, but his teammates do adore him. And I don't know if some of that effect is that they've played with such bad quarterback play in this entire Saleh era that when Rodgers comes in, it's like, oh my God, like, what even is this? Or is it some of it that just that's how Aaron Rodgers is, where his teammates really, really do just love him? I think it's probably a little bit of both. So, like I said, it's Rodgers in a vacuum. There's so much variance there. Like, if Rodgers plays the full season and looks like the guy he's been most of his career, you shrug your shoulders and be like, this is just Aaron Rodgers. He's just different. If he misses 10 games because he ended up spraining his ankle and missed some time, and then, bangs his hand on a helmet again and missed, like, he's just got an old body. It doesn't feel like last year where it's like, well, the Jets are doomed. They can't even get the ball to the 50-yard line because Tyrod Taylor can play, and the Jets should be able to run the ball with Breece Hall in this offensive line. I mean, the Jets were playing a deep stretch of the season last year with Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, and Zach Wilson. Like, that is hard to quantify how much of an anchor that is for any kind of team. So I definitely think the optimism in the building is back, not only because of Rodgers, but because they actually have professionals at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I know it can be quantified. They were, as a giant minus number. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the Jets ended up going 7-10, right? Last year. They won 7 games. It's unbelievable. They beat Josh Allen. They beat CJ Stroud. They really should have beaten Patrick Mahomes as well.
Should have. And they killed the Texans. Murdered the Texans. That's the most puzzling one of the year.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Zach Wilson outdueled CJ Stroud. And that was kind of like the last full game that Zach Wilson may ever play in the NFL, though he is, as we were talking about earlier today, Connor, he's still randomly on the roster.
Technically, like on paper.
not a huge market for Zach, shockingly.
It's like when somebody's consulting for a company, but you never actually see them at their desk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, still just getting those checks. All right, before we get to a few over-under draft markets, can Nelly Korda continue her hot start and fend off the LPGA's finest at the Chevron Championship? Tune in from Thursday to Sunday this week for the first major of the season, only on NBC and Peacock. All right, going to get your thoughts, Connor, on a few of these draft position over-unders, which are becoming, which are proliferating in the market a bit more. You start off with your man, Michael Penix Jr., his draft position over-under 32.5. The under is -145. The over is +115. Do you think he is a first rounder?
Yeah, I do. This is the one I'm the most comfortable with. I mean, this is such a nice price because I believe Penix is going in the top 15. Well, top 16. I like to use the Seahawks as my little my little life raft there. Top 16. But this gives you the bonus that, hey, things happen in the NFL draft that you didn't expect. Like Justin Fields fell that year. Will Levis had a tumble last year. Things happen. It's just, and it even surprises teams. This gives you the insurance that if he falls, somebody will come into the back end of round one for Michael Penix. You need the 5th-year option. The cost to go into the back end around. We saw it with the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. We saw it with the Packers with Jordan Love. The track record of this is actually pretty nice because it takes off the spotlight, and it helped Will Levis in a way where I know Levis went in the second round, but when you're not drafted in the top 15, you don't get that savior feel. Like if your team stashes you, nobody cares. They're just like, oh yeah, they took him there. They're going to stash him and develop him. This is one of my favorite bets. Like I said, I would take it under 16.5 if that was in play with better odds.
Okay, but you're clearly then team Penix over Knicks being a potential first rounder, I guess.
Yeah, Bo, I hear a lot of mixed things on Bo in terms of where he'll go. I hear the same thing where it's like back into round one if somebody came back in top of day 2, one of those first picks in the second round. I think everybody likes what they see from Bo on tape. I just think he's physically limited. You don't see a lot of prospects built the way Bo Nix is go in the top 10 of a draft. Now, the wild card is Sean Payton. Sean Payton kind of does what he wants. He has final say. Bo Nix does fit everything Sean Payton wants to do. I think that's what sets Bo's number a little weird. But I think if Denver really wanted Bo Nix, they'd love to figure out how to trade out of their pick and then take him later on.
Yep. No, I think that makes sense. Next one for you, Connor. Taliese Fuaga, his draft position 13.5. The under is backed -140. The over is +110. He's +150 to be the second offensive lineman drafted. Where do you stand on Fuaga?
Yeah, I love Fuaga, and so does the league. I mean, this is one where I like the under as well. I know -140 doesn't really excite anyone, but just when you look at him on his perspectives, I would say it starts at Tennessee at 7. I would say he's in play for the Jets at 10. And then, it's nice that you get 13.5. The Raiders have a big, wide open hole at right tackle. Say the quarterback carousel doesn't go the way they want. I would take Fuaga. And, obviously 14 at the Saints makes a ton of sense. That's why this is set the way it is. But yeah, Taliese Fuaga, he is just, everybody loves it. It's hard to find somebody that doesn't love his tape, his mental makeup, that even if you have to play him at guard, so what? He'll be, borderline all-pro there. Second offensive lineman's tricky because I'll say this. Joe Alt is in play to be the first one taken. The NFL is obsessed with J.C. Latham. I don't view him that way. I view him as a back end around one guy, but you will find some offensive line people that look at Latham. I mean, I think Latham could go 5 to the Chargers, and I've seen that number. Yeah, I've seen that number around like plus 1,300, and I'm like, man, like it's not likely, but if you look at the Chargers roster, you look at the fact Latham's a right tackle or guard, you look at what Harbaugh wants to do schematically. Harbaugh has coached against Latham. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Latham goes in the top 7 picks in this draft. So that's why I wouldn't take Fuaga to be the second offensive lineman off the board.
Wow. So it could be Joe Alt going to 7 to the Titans. Okay. Well, that would be quite a little way to kind of corner the OT market. I'll be honest with you, the OT feels like it's going to go in an order. It could go in any one of, 50,000 different combinations in the first round in terms of number of guys, right, and the order that they go off the board. It looks to me at least like Joe Alt is a soft one. And then 2, 3, 4 are kind of all relatively in the same tier. And then after that, it's like 5 through 15. You'll get different opinions from different people, which is, I don't remember ever hearing this kind of lack of clear stratification in a position group. And obviously it's a very talented year for these guys as well. But so yeah, I'm very intrigued to see how the OTs break. But and I'm actually surprised that under 13.5 is minus 140, but you do have a handful of outs. And if the Chargers go OT, then you could get a little mini run in the top half of round 1, which would really make things interesting. The guy that I'm kind of growing fond of, not just because of the way his number is moving, but every kind of evaluator who has anything to say about the cornerback market tends to glow about this player. He's Alabama's Terrion Arnold, and he is now sitting at 15.5 in terms of an over-under. I have a little bit of a long shot play on him to be the first defensive player drafted, and I think ultimately he could, pretty clearly flip favorite here as first CB. What is your read on Terrion Arnold and where he ultimately gets drafted, and if there's a play on this total?
I like the over on this one, but it does scare you with the Colts potentially going outside corner at 15. That's not out of the range here. Now, why I like the over is I think Quinyon Mitchell will be the first corner taken. I saw Quinyon. I was very surprised when Quinyon Mitchell, first defensive player taken, was plus 350 for a long time. I don't know where that is right now on DraftKings, but I mean, everybody loves Quinyon Mitchell, and he's had the best process of any defensive player in this entire draft. So it's nothing against Arnold. It's just that Mitchell was able to do things that Arnold wasn't. He went to the Senior Bowl. He was the best player at the Senior Bowl. He tested out of this world at the Combine. I think that, teams love when they answer questions about smaller school players. He comes out of Toledo, and it's like, oh, your tape was dominant, but then you dominated against better competition against the Senior Bowl, and we love you at the Combine. We don't fear that here. So with Arnold, I like the over. I look at the Eagles at 22. I think that's a very likely landing spot. I think the Steelers at 20 need a corner. The Rams at 19. Arnold's a weird one because he was a big safety recruit coming out of high school. He plays corner kind of like a safety. He's a really good tackler. I think he's a physical player. He's got really good ball skills. But then you look at, the transition to the position, there is projecting. Like, he doesn't anticipate route combinations. His awareness is not where it needs to be at the position. I thought he was going to test better. I think Arnold was kind of billed to everybody in the draft community as like, oh, this guy is going to be out of this world. And then he comes in under 6 feet tall. He comes in 189 pounds. His arm length is 59th percentile, and he runs over 4.5. Like, it's not bad, but it's not out of this world cornerback. You're like, okay, like that's doesn't really excite me. So I think with Arnold, I like the play of the over here, but he'll be a first rounder for sure.
Okay. Quinyon Mitchell's price is actually drifting on DraftKings, so that might be the play to take him as the first defensive player drafted. All right. Well, Connor, your appearance today, much better than Matthew Berry's appearance on this same show. You actually provided real, actionable information as opposed to lapsing into judgment of my parenting skills and discussion of dictators throughout the 20th century.
And I'm awake.
Historically.
Like, once again, there wasn't much to do. All I had to do was stay awake and like speak a few words coherently, and I passed Matthew.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everyone can follow Connor on Twitter at Connor J. Rogers, MetsPod for SNY, Stock Exchange for PFF, Jets pre and post when that comes back up as well. And obviously you're on with me and Matthew on the Fantasy Football Happy Hour, and all of your draft content, NBCsports.com, rotoworld.com. Connor is excellent at what he does. Trust him on this stuff more than anyone else. Connor, is there anything you want to plug?
No, just NBCsports.com. Wrote a mock draft this week. What I would do, got the draft notebook coming out Friday, maybe when you're listening to this. So I really, really appreciate it, guys. Drew, I believe I will see you in Kentucky. Jay, I will see you in like 4 days or whatever it is.
Yeah, indeed. All right, mate. Thank you very much for coming on.
Out here on the farm, checking out the horses as we speak. You got to get my research in.
Yeah, doing the grind. All right, thanks, Connor. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. All right, before we talk some NBA, the countdown is on. Wednesday was the 100-day mark to the Summer Olympics in Paris. Tune in this summer on NBC and Peacock to see the greatest athletes in the world go for gold in the City of Light. Okay, NBA, before we close out, I was just saying before we got on, been tracking these awards ballots as they're coming out for NBA, and they are razor thin. I think I've seen not all the votes that have been kind of publicly released are in the kind of main tracker that's publicly available. So I think I've seen a little bit more that's in that. And the most improved player and sixth man of the year through like 24 ballots, I literally have both races tied. So we'll see how they unfold. Fingers crossed there. But let's talk about these play-in games. The play-in games to date have been chaotic, Drew. Some wild swings within these games. I think the biggest story in a way at the moment is Jimmy Butler, who allegedly has a sprained MCL, though his agent is kind of contesting that. And now there are murmurs that he may actually play on Friday, but we'll see how that unfolds. At the moment, the market is skeptical. The Heat are 1.5 point favorites over the Kobe White-led Chicago Bulls. The total is a lowly 207. Do you have any lean on this game?
Well, I mean, the key is Butler, because he is, so quintessential to success for the Miami Heat as they're currently rostered. And that, that information is going to move that market bigly. And honestly, if he's he's built different, Jay. He might be the kind of guy that's just like, I don't need an MCL to play. We're going. Does that risk more significant damage to your knee? Yes. Would he do it anyway? Probably. So I'm kind of leaning, he may just go, at which point I'd kind of have some interest in the Heat, but not a ton. The rest of the flaws of the Heat were so clearly on display yesterday. I just, what else do you need to see? I guess this is not a good team. That said, the Bulls, they have some defensive issues that I think the Heat, in particular, some of their shot makers are going to be able to take advantage of. So slight lead for me into the over here. I think 207 is not really giving credit where it's due to how the Heat offense can be good at times, and the Bulls defense is kind of structurally flawed.
Yep. Seems like just after we started recording, Butler was actually officially kind of ruled out with the sprained MCL, which is incredible that he was able to play for 3 quarters on that. And also have the play when you kind of knew that it was a problem was when he had that steal and fast break dunk. But the fact that he was able to accelerate and leap that way with a sprained MCL before seemingly really feeling it is pretty incredible.
Okay,
the guy is ridiculous.
Here's a wild take for you. Jimmy Butler out. I liked the over. As soon as we finish hitting, the record on this podcast, I'm getting into this big time, because this is now, there's no way that that's correctly adjusted. Because he specifically slows things down so much with the ball in his hand in the fourth quarter. This is not going to now necessarily going to be a low possession game.
Yep. And he's also a kind of perimeter player who doesn't really take any threes. I mean, he's been making them this year, but he's not high volume. Naturally, it might mean more Duncan Robinson potentially. So
shift that usage to Hero and Robinson, and this could fly.
Yep. Okay, the other game, Kings at Pelicans. Kings 1.5 point favorites in New Orleans. Total 212.5. A lot of missing characters in this one, principally Zion Williamson, obviously, but also Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk on the Kings side. I was a little surprised that this flipped into Kings' favorite. I was expecting this would be 1.5 the other way, but what do you think?
Yeah, I am pretty close to market on this one, particularly on the side. So I'm not going to have any action either way here. And it's a bummer that we're not going to get to see Zion take on these guys, because he is a very tough matchup for the Kings in terms of the way that they're rostered and some of the lack of kind of muscle, interior defense, rim protection. So that would have been a nice opportunity for the Pelicans to punch their ticket. But ultimately, I have 6-1 in pocket on Pelicans to miss, riding it out. No hedging here. And I think ultimately I'm going to be watching this total pretty closely. I think what we saw in the second half of the Lakers game was pretty clearly, I thought, a little bit of a some luck box threes from some ancillary players. And if I don't know that I believe in Trey Murphy and Jose Alvarado being able to kind of drain high leverage buckets at the end of the game in this one. So I'm going to hope that there's a little bit of kind of the same level of intensity and energy that you saw from the Kings in the first half against the Warriors, that you see that again against the Pelicans, and you maybe have a little bit of a higher scoring first half. And then that could give you an opportunity to get a nice play on the under, because I think second half under is probably where this one's going.
Yeah, for everything that's happened the past week, the two big winners by far, and to me it's not even close, are the Boston Celtics and the
Yeah,
Oklahoma City Thunder.
not
Who
close.
the Celtics one is obvious, and everyone has talked about that. How their path is now either the Chicago Bulls or the Butlerless Heat, followed by Cavs or Magic, and you could argue that the three best teams in the East, or at least the three ones with the most upside and are the most frightening, are the Knicks, Bucks, and Sixers, who are already worse than Boston, and now they're all on the other side of the bracket. And so the Celtics are going to get to the finals, or going to be able to get to the finals by only having to play one of them. But I think the sneakier one is Oklahoma City, who look like before the play-in, their most likely opponent in round one would have been the Lakers. And that was a much more troubling matchup than whoever they get now. Like, they're going to be minus 350, minus 400 favorites in round one. And they're also on the opposite side of the bracket to the Nuggets. Though if they have to play the Mavs in round two, I think I might make the Mavs favorite there, odds agnostic. I don't think the market will necessarily. The market might line up that way too, but broken very well for Boston and OKC. Before we close out and say goodbye for the weekend, is there a favorite game one or series angle that you have?
Well, I liked your commentary. My number for Boston moved appreciably, and it was already high to win the East after the result yesterday. My Oklahoma City Thunder number moved as well, because the fact that they're going to get one of Pelicans, Kings in their current form makes the likelihood that they can kind of get their playoff stinker first ever playoff series for a lot of these, get that out of the way. Against a team that you're clearly head and shoulders better than, I think is pretty huge for them. The rest of the West is going to be a dogfight. And speaking of dogs, the Timber Puppies laid 1.5 with them against the Suns. Ultimately, the way I like to try to model a series is I try to capture the reduction in possessions as the series goes along, try to capture the pivot in offensive efficiency where it goes from more of a free, you're able to run your sets. Plan A and plan B are working. By the end of the series, they're not. And it's much more about isolation and about your specific ability to create. And for the Suns, I think ultimately they have a better chance to win the series the deeper it goes. But to start out here, I'm pretty excited to see what Chris Finch and company have in store for the Suns, because I do think the Suns defense is havable, and I think that there can be a couple of small adjustments with where Rudy Gobert in particular, his positioning on the floor, to try to disrupt some of the intermediate success that the Suns have offensively. So laid it with the Timberwolves in the game one against the Suns. I think I laid 1.5, and I'm pretty sure you can still get that hopefully you can still get that if you're listening to this podcast now. But I would lay up to about 2.5 in that one. My fair is 3. And I think the other clear misprice here in this one, I'm really scratching my head about. 7 points between the Lakers and the Nuggets is as an enormous line. And I'm not saying that the Nuggets aren't worthy of respect and that they aren't worthy of being the favorites to win the West. I'm fine with the way that the market is kind of treating them, but I do think that there is a huge, kind of premium on that team right now. And this Lakers team is good enough at their best to challenge and at least have a competitive game here. And 7 points is a lot. My fair is 4.5. I was going to get involved around the open thinking it was going to get bet Lakers, and it's been one-way traffic Nuggets. I am not there. So it's me on an island betting with LeBron and company on the kind of the biggest game of the weekend in Denver.
Yeah, I haven't looked at this, and it'll be a very small sample, but I'd be interested to see what the home court advantage is specifically for the first game that you play in Denver when you're not as, I guess, acclimated to the altitude. And I'm not sure, maybe that's just immaterial relative to your average game in Denver. But the Nuggets have the biggest home court advantage. I do think it helps that the Lakers will have had, 5 days between games. And I think that the Nuggets are a worse team than they were last year, and the Lakers are a better team. And that's largely just about LeBron's health, where he seems to be in a much better spot. Also, just like the Dennis Schroeder was a massive part of that last Lakers team. I think that the way that D'Lo and having Dinwiddie and whatever Gabe Vincent can give, I just think that they have little bit more oomph on offense, which isn't a super scientific way to look at it, but I do think this team can score a little bit more, and also think that they will have. They took a while in the series last year to figure out that like AD guarding Jokic, one, that didn't work, and then two, AD like just going at Jokic also didn't work. Where they can't just have straight up post ups AD Jokic. Jokic is so good with just his hands and his timing. He's just massive. Like he's so strong. One of the most instructive things I've seen in basketball is just how good Jokic is walling off the rim against Giannis. Like Giannis really struggles to finish through Jokic just because Jokic just puts his arms in the right place, is standing in the right place, and he's just so strong. And AD found out about that the hard way last playoffs. So interested to see if the Lakers can leverage their offense into a bit more success against the Nuggets. My best bet of the weekend and of the first round by far, and this is the biggest bet I've had on a series price in a while. I don't understand how the Knicks are underdogs against the Sixers. And I feel like the market is, one, if you're a 3-point favorite at home in game one, and obviously that means you have home court for the series, that doesn't reconcile with being a dog for the series. And I understand that like a game one line does not necessarily imply that lines and series prices have to be the exact same number every single time. But I think this is projecting. The only way that this reconciles is if you are guaranteeing a significant increase as the series goes on in Philadelphia's rating. And I don't think you can just guarantee that. Like, yes, Embiid may get better as the series goes on. I think it's more likely he just stays the same, or maybe potentially even gets worse or gets re-injured. Like right now, he seems just totally out of rhythm. He has no tank whatsoever. He is so gassed in these games. And I think that the Knicks are just extremely underrated. I think everyone wrote them off after Randall went down, not realizing that Jalen Brunson is like a top 8 player in the NBA now and a top 3 or 4 offensive player. And the Knicks, they just have and the other thing too is like OG Anunoby's fine. Like that was my biggest concern, more so than Randall. It seemed like OG might just be cooked with the elbow. He looks fine. He looks healthy. He's shooting the ball well. He's able to play big minutes. And I think that what Dante DiVincenzo and his improvement has given them as a secondary option, I think is huge. Hartenstein and Mitch, to throw them at Embiid for 48 minutes. These like two incredible defensive players who are 7-footers and I think who can guard Embiid capably enough. No one can actually guard Embiid, but these guys will be able to do a good enough go at it that I just think this Knicks team matches up well. I'm not impressed at all by Philadelphia in the game against Miami. They did not look right. I think it's a problem for a team that has Buddy Hield and Campaign in the rotation and is relying seriously on Nicholas Batum, who I understand had an amazing game, but wouldn't want to be counting on that constantly. Tyrese Maxey was terrible against the Heat, I thought. I think he'll be better going forward, but concerned about Embiid. I think it's a massive advantage for the Knicks that like they just don't have bad players in the rotation. Like they're going to play 7 guys in the playoffs and they're all good. And I think that people are seriously underrating Jalen Brunson. To me, it's comical, the idea that Tatum is going to finish ahead of him on an MVP ballot. Brunson was much, much better than Tatum this year. And the only reason that's going to happen is because Tatum has significantly better teammates. And I love Jason Tatum, very pro Tatum, but Brunson is insane. And I think the Knicks should be decisively favored in this, and it should be priced more like your typical game one 3-point favorite is priced. But what do you think?
Yeah, I can't get anywhere close to this one. This is the biggest misprice of any series that I could tell you. And I can't really explain it because I can't get to this price if I assume peak Embiid for 40 minutes a game for all the games, which is which is a leap, right? Like that is not a guarantee. And I think the two things that I could add is, number one, if you force me to have a hot take about this series, I would say that in a playoff setting, Julius Randle absence is addition by subtraction, and that in particular this series, like what's not being correctly accounted for is there are going to be a couple of games, and they may be games 1 and 2, and maybe games 1, 2, and 5, where the Knicks are just clearly winning, like they were at halftime against the Celtics at the end of the season, right? Like they're just clearly ahead. And in those games, Embiid is not even going to play the fourth quarter. They're just going to pack it in. Like his minutes are going to be, pretty sporadic in this series. And there are just going to be a couple of gimmies for the Knicks, and nothing is going to come easy for the Sixers. And that's because of the way the Knicks play. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised that there's as much market support as there is for the Sixers right now. And honestly, I think this could be a short series in favor of the Knicks.
Yeah, I do think. Look, I think Randall being out is bad for the Knicks just because he is. Despite being, I think it's just comical that he was All NBA and an All Star last year over Brunson, who is a vastly superior player to Randall, and I think was last year too. Like Randall's good, but I do think the team that. I mean, it's difficult because they do need some kind of secondary creation, but at the same time, the team just kind of makes a little bit more sense without him, that they can go a little bit smaller, but not really lose much on defense. They have more shooting out there. They're just less clogged. When the Knicks with Randall, when it would get awkward, it's like, well, Randall, I mean, he does, bomb three. He's gotten better at bombing threes, but also like he has the ball in his hands a ton, and there's always a center there. And it would just get a little bit too clogged up. And now the fact that, you still have an elite defensive center in Hartenstein or Robinson on the court at all times, you can replicate what Randall brings defensively and then some with OG and Hart. And it just seems like the offense, by being just a bit more lithe and a bit faster, and guys making just quicker decisions, because Randall, for his strength, does not make quick decisions at all. Just holds the ball in the triple threat for eternity, it feels like. And instead you have guys like, Josh Hart, who is a good passer and moves and is fantastic in transition, and he just makes quick decisions. Dante DiVincenzo is constantly moving, and there just seems to be more space for Brunson, even if there's not actually that much more shooting. Just seems just with the movement, there's more space for Brunson, there's more speed, and I just think that they're a better team than Philadelphia right now, and they have home court in the series. And Embiid just doesn't. He airballed his first shot against Miami. He's just. Someone who watched a ton of Embiid earlier in the season when I was on him for MVP, like he just has no rhythm at the moment. Like he is just, it's all very deliberate. His line was kind of fixed by hitting a couple threes in the fourth quarter against Miami.
Yeah.
And
he collapsed at the free throw line.
Yeah, he just doesn't look physically right at the moment, which makes sense given how gigantic a human being he is and how long he was out and the type of injury that he had. So, I mean, they need like MVP Embiid to win this series, and I wouldn't bank on that. And I think, to your point, the price in the market is kind of guaranteeing that guy is going to show up and be able to play huge minutes. And I don't buy that. So all in Knickerbockers.
Yeah, you said it better than I did about Randall, but I agree with all those points. Like it's just a more fluid offense, and higher ceiling.
Yep. All right.
In a playoff setting, especially. Yep.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's about the worst playoff player in history, which, again, small sample, I do think that they would be better with him, but I think some of the stylistic trade-offs that they've been able to make, and also just the depth, the relative depth that they have, given you don't really need depth if you have Tibbs as your coach, I think that they will have more than enough to win this series, and I've wagered accordingly. All right, we are done. Don't forget to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those of you watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, don't forget to rate and subscribe. And also a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. Thanks again to Connor Rogers for joining us. From Jay Crouch and Drew Dinsick, we'll see you next week.